I'm back, where I belong, not in the booth, but just right up front, no more disembodied voice. That was just yucky, but all is good. Life is good. All right, announcements. I also sent email earlier this morning with most of those announcements. I forgot the B courses, so I sent a little PS. The B courses quiz is up. It's available. Some people have already done it. It's based on Chapter 8. So there you go. All right, we're going to start with a clicker question. What's that about? Oh, I always start with a clicker question. Almost always. Okay. So you saw this graph on Monday when there was this woman up in the booth talking. As the saving rate fell from the mid-1970s until 2006, so when we had this trend, highlight. Is that good? Oh, yes. When we had that downward sloping trend. What was true? A, some people were putting more money into their retirement funds. B, some people were taking money out of their retirement funds. C, some people were borrowing money. D, some people were paying off loans. Or E, all of the above. Go ahead and click in. A, B, C, D, or E. Choose a color. Let's start with purple. Purple's a good color. 3 seconds. 1, 2, and 3. Cool. Okay, so when we look at any graph, data, whatever, for the aggregate economy, we're looking at something, at least for the United States, if we're looking at U.S. data, we're looking at something that's capturing the behavior of hundreds of millions of people, 300 and some million people at this point. And so when we look at any statistic, whether it's saving rate or consumption or investment or anything, we've got a whole lot of different behaviors that are going into that one statistic and making up the aggregate result that we see. And so when we saw this decline in saving over the 1970 to early 2000s period, what it was reflecting was a whole lot of different behavior by different people. So there were some people who were putting more money into their retirement funds, and that would be part of saving. So people who were putting money into their retirement funds, they were increasing the amount of saving both for themselves and for the economy as a whole. There were some people who were taking money out of their retirement funds. Some people in the economy were retired, were living off their savings, and so they were taking money out of their retirement funds. There were some people who were borrowing money. Another way of dis-saving. You borrow money because your spending exceeds your income, your consumption exceeds your income. And so in order to finance that, one way of financing consumption in excess of disposable income is through borrowing. So there were some people who were dis-saving, who were borrowing money, and that's reflected there. And there were also people who were different people who were paying off loans. Now, you're not going to have the same person in both categories A and B. You're not going to have the same person in both categories C and D at any given moment in time. But at any given moment in time, you have some people in each of those 4 categories. And so what we're seeing reflected here is all of those kinds of behaviors. All those behaviors. Some people are saving, some people are borrowing, some people are taking money out of retirement, some people are paying off loans. All of that's going on. When for the economy as a whole, the overall saving rate is declining. Excuse me. It means that we have, on net for the economy as a whole, by, say, the year 2000, a much lower rate of total saving, so a smaller total number of dollars in the people who are doing the saving, which is the A and the D, those are the saving parts, in 2000 than was the case in, say, 1980. Okay. So, yes, this is not a clicker question. This is from yesterday, Monday, when I asked you what would you do. And what fascinates me about this question is this is the 3rd year I've used the clickers to ask this question of what would you do if you had an extra $200 in your paycheck. What's astounding to me is each of you sitting in your seat thinks you're an absolutely unique individual, right? That you're unique. You are special, you are you, and you are. You're special, you're you, da 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 da. Look at the stability in those numbers. I mean, that's just amazing to me. That 3%, 4% answered A, 14%, 12%, 12% answered B, 41%, 43%, 42% answered C, 30, 32 answered D, 12, 13, 12% answered E. So as unique and special and wonderful as each of you are, and you are unique and special and wonderful, the law of large numbers also tends to work. And what we see when we've got a sample, in this case of 700 people, is pretty stable behavior over time. It's pretty amazing. And so the weighted average in terms of how much additional spending there'd be out of that $200 was $65 in fall 12, $64 in fall 2013, and $66 on, whoops, this should be a 4. On Monday. Pretty stable responses. Amazing stability. So even those clickers, you think, oh, what's this clicker thing? She loves the silly clicker thing. But the silly clicker thing reveals behavior on your part that's not just about you. It's indicative of Econ 1 students in general. Are you reflective of the economy? Probably not. You're younger than the economy. You're more educated than the economy as a whole. But given the sample being the same, people who are in Econ 1, we've got an awful lot of stability showing up here 3 years in a row. Okay, where we ended on Monday, when, as I said in the email this morning, I didn't stop to breathe the entire time. Sorry about that. That was very stressful. We were talking about interest rates. And I had asked you 2 questions. I'd asked you first, if you were a borrower, how would you respond to an increase in interest rates? And you answered what is pretty normal. An increase in interest rates, if you're a borrower, tends to lead, in the aggregate for the economy as a whole, to a decrease in consumption spending, because borrowers face higher costs of borrowing and therefore borrow less and buy fewer goods like cars and appliances and all those sorts of things that you buy with borrowed money. The second question I asked you, where I wasn't able to make eye contact and make sure you were with me, was suppose instead that you weren't a borrower. Suppose you were somebody who lived off your savings. So that could be someone who is retired, for instance. So somebody who's retired and their month-to-month income comes from the earnings they have on their retirement fund. It could be a trust fund baby. It could be somebody who doesn't have a job and their entire spending money comes from what they earn off of their trust fund. Those are 2 examples of people who live off of their savings. And I said, suppose that interest rates were 0.01%, in which case if you had $1 million, you would have $100 to spend that year. Versus suppose interest rates were instead 5%, in which case you would have available to spend $50,000. You can't spend any of the $1 million because that's your principal. If you spend $1 million, you won't have $1 million anymore. You can't be a millionaire if you don't have $1 million. So you start spending $1 million, you're no longer a millionaire. You got to save it. You continue to save it, and you live off of the interest income. So let me ask it this way. If your income was $50,000 a year instead of $100 a year, would you spend the same amount at $50,000 a year as you would at $100 a year if that's your total income? Yes or no? No. If your income was $50,000 a year instead of $100 a year, would you spend less in the year that your income was $50,000 than you would in the year that your income was $100? No. If your total income, the source of your spending money was $50,000 a year instead of $100 a year, would you spend more if you had $50,000 instead of $100 a year to spend? Yeah. So that was the last question, which didn't get explained well enough because by then I'm up in the booth and I'm totally panicking. If you live off your savings, if you're somebody who lives off your savings, so you're a retired person, you're a trust fund baby, one of those kinds of people who doesn't have a job and just lives off the earnings from their financial wealth, then when interest rates go up, that gives you more spending money. That gives you more interest income and leads to an increase in consumption. So the same thing, an increase in interest rates has two contrasting effects. For some people, it makes them spend less, buy fewer goods and services. For other people, it makes them spend more, that is, buy more goods and services. And we don't know until we know what's the mix of borrowers and retirees / trust fund babies in the economy. Until we know that mix of what's the share of borrowers, what's the share of trust fund babies, and how much money do all these people have, we don't know what the net effect is in terms of consumption. So an increase in interest rates has two opposite effects. It makes borrowers spend less. It makes people who are living off their savings spend more. For the economy as a whole, the whole room, we can't say what's the net effect of those two groups of people's behavior. We know that there's two different behaviors. We don't know whether for the economy as a whole, an increase in interest rates will increase or decrease consumption spending. It depends upon the mix in the economy of these two groups, the borrowers and those who are living off of their savings. Better? More clear than Monday? Yeah. And now I can look at you and see whether or not it seems to be more clear. That helps. Oops. All right, let's try another clicker question. Oh, thank you. Suppose, this isn't about interest rates. This is about whether or not the banker says yes. Suppose it becomes easier, is that right? Suppose it becomes much easier to borrow money. You go into some place where you're going to borrow money and you're just more likely to get a, yeah, sure, we'll loan to you. Suppose it becomes easier to borrow money. What would you do? Would you borrow more and increase your spending? Would you borrow the same amount and keep your spending the same? Or would you borrow less and decrease your spending? What would you do if it became easier to borrow money? A, B, C, D. A, no, A, B, or C, no D's and E's, please. 3 seconds. Did it get put back together? We're good? Thank you. Thanks for helping. So it's easier to borrow money. What would you do? A, B, or C? Okay, awesome. 2 seconds. 1 and 2. So what do we have? We've got 33% of you would increase your spending, 61% would keep your spending the same, 5% would decrease your spending. If it became easier to borrow money, on net what we've got is there's going to be an increase in spending in the economy. 33% is bigger than 5%. And in fact, that's what we see in the economy, that the availability of credit, independent of interest rates, the availability of credit is one of the things that influences consumption spending. When there's an increase in, it's often shorthanded CCA for consumer credit availability. So we're not talking about loans to businesses, we're talking about loans to people. When there's an increase in consumer credit availability, there tends to be an increase in consumption spending. When there's a decrease in consumer credit availability, there tends to be a decrease in consumption spending. This is not something we see often. An increase or decrease in credit availability, independent of interest rates, tends to be a sign that the financial markets are screwed up, that there is something going very, very, very wrong in the financial markets. It is what we saw in 2008, 2009, 2010, 2011. One of the things that led to the severity of the Great Recession was the lack of willingness of our financial institutions, the banks and other lenders, to lend, be it to consumers or a separate topic we'll get to later today, to businesses. The aspect of this that we're talking about right now is the consumption spending. We've got a graduate student in the department right now who's working on this for his dissertation. It is showing that the decline in availability of credit to consumers in 2009, 2010, 2011 worsened the economy. That it led to reduction that is, in consumption spending and made the downturn worse. Next one. What would you do? Suppose you became much more optimistic about the future, particularly about your chances of getting a job. So you became, it's like, maybe in fact somebody offered you a job. That'd make you really optimistic, wouldn't it? Suppose that you suddenly became much more optimistic about the future and about your chances of getting a job. What would you do? What would you do now in response to that increased optimism? Would you increase your spending, keep your spending the same, or decrease your spending? A, B, or C? No D's or E's, please. 3 seconds. 1, 2, and 3. Good job. So what do we have? We've got 51% would increase their spending, 47% would keep it the same, 2% would decrease it. To get a sense, therefore, of the impact on the economy as a whole, what we're really comparing are the people who increase and the people who decrease. We've got 25 to 1 difference there. Clearly, the increase in optimism, it doesn't lead everyone to increase their spending, but for the economy as a whole, what we expect to see is that when there is an increase, what we say is an increase in expectations or increase in optimism, either way, it's the same difference. We're going to get an increase in consumption spending. Economists measure this level of optimism or the expectations for the future with 2 different surveys. One is called the Consumer Confidence Survey, and that's conducted by an organization in New York called the Conference Board, and one is called the Consumer Sentiment Index, and that's conducted by a group at the University of Michigan. It's just 2 different indices, 2 different surveys. They call up a group of households. We demonstrated that 600 households that are pretty much the same, that would be like Econ 1 people from one year to the next, are going to give pretty consistent answers. So they have a survey, they call up a number of households. It's a big enough number to give them a reliable sample of the economy. They ask them a series of questions from which they come up with a number that indicates how optimistic or pessimistic people are about the economy. When the Consumer Confidence Survey or the Consumer Sentiment Index, when either one of those things increases, it leads to an increase in consumption spending because people who are more optimistic are likely to spend more. When either of these things, and they tend to move together, when they decrease, then people are more pessimistic, and that leads to typically a curtailment, a decrease in consumption spending. So we've had 5. Consumption spending depends upon disposable income, wealth, interest rates, although we're not sure which way the interest rates effect goes, availability of credit, and expectations. That's what I just put down here. So another way of saying the same thing, but using the math language, is consumption is a function of. That's the same thing as saying consumption depends upon. Consumption is a function of disposable income, wealth, interest rates, although we're not sure which way that goes, credit availability, and expectations. Sometimes what you see is people will put pluses and minuses underneath each of these variables to indicate whether it's a positive or a direct effect when one increases, the other increases, or an inverse or negative effect. So we know, for instance, that an increase in disposable income causes an increase in consumption. If we graph that, it would be an upward sloping line, so we put a plus underneath that. We know an increase in wealth gives us an increase in consumption, and as you showed, it's a relatively small effect, but it is there. We don't know which way the interest rate effect goes because of the different behaviors of borrowers and people who live off their savings. We know an increase in the availability of credit leads to an increase in consumption spending, and an increase or an improvement in expectations leads to an increase in consumption spending as well. And so if we could draw a graph that had consumption spending on one axis and disposable income on another axis and wealth on another axis and credit availability on another axis and expectations on another axis, we could draw a surface in time. Let me see, we'd be in 6 dimensions there. I'm not quite sure how we would draw that. We can't really draw in more than 2 dimensions. So we can't draw a graph that shows that entire relationship between consumption and those other 5 variables, but we can draw graphs that show the relationship between consumption spending and one other variable. If you're a math student, you can probably graph in 3 dimensions, but economists can only graph in 2 dimensions. If we were able to graph in 3 dimensions, we would all be mathematicians. So how do we usually draw this? We draw a consumption function. We put consumption on the vertical axis. We can put either income or disposable income on the horizontal axis. So you will see, if you look at other textbooks, so if you go and pick up other economics textbooks, or if you took it in high school, look back at that textbook, some of those books have income on that horizontal axis, and some of them have disposable income on that horizontal axis. Both of those things are graphed in the book that you have that I wrote. For right now, what we're going to do is we're going to look at how consumption spending relates to income. So we're going to have just income on the horizontal axis, not disposable income. And what do we know? We know that if income is some level y1, just randomly choose the level of income y1, that results in some level of consumption c1, just sort of randomly choose some level of consumption c1 and draw a point there. We know that at a higher level of income, say $200 more per month, at a higher level of income, there will be a higher level of consumption spending. So as income rises, consumption spending rises to some amount C2. You're just sort of randomly choosing some dots here. It means that we have, I think it got big enough so your line goes through it. We have an upward sloping relationship that shows how consumption spending depends upon income. If there's a change in the amount of income in the economy, that is if GDP changes, which therefore means total income changes, if there's a change in the amount of income in the economy, that's something that's measured on the horizontal axis, and so that would be shown as moving along an existing consumption function. If it's measured on one of the axes and it changes, we move along whatever the existing line is. If any of the other factors that we've talked about that influences consumption were to change, let me read that sentence, if there was a change in any of the other factors that we've talked about, then that would take this relationship between income and consumption and make the whole thing shift. So if there was, for instance, here let me do it again, consumption on the vertical, income on the horizontal, some initial relationship that shows consumption depending upon income, and then suppose that we had, for instance, a decrease in credit availability, such as we saw during the crisis. If there was a decrease in credit availability, that decrease in credit availability means at every possible level of income, there's a lower level of consumption spending. The entire consumption function, that's supposed to be a straight line, the entire consumption function shifts down. I'll call it C2, which is still some function of income, but it's shifted down. The relationship between consumption and income has shifted down because of the drop in credit availability. We care about two things with this consumption line. We care about it shifting up and down, and we also care about the slope of this thing. Now, slope, you remember from some wonderful geometry teacher at some point in life. Oops. Or not. Someone over there said not wonderful, but whatever. From some geometry teacher at some point in life. Slope, you remember, is rise over run. And the rise here is the movement along the vertical axis, is the change in consumption, and the run would be the change in income. That's one way of, that's not one way, that is the equation for the slope of that line. Bless you. In economics, that relationship between consumption and income, or between consumption and disposable income, is so important we give that concept its own name and we call it the marginal propensity to consume. Remember this stuff is from the 1930s, marginal, they were already using the word marginal back in the 1890s, so they continue with the word marginal, which simply means additional. Propensity means tendency, so the additional tendency to consume, the marginal propensity to consume, the MPC. The MPC is slightly different than what I just wrote down. It's the change in consumption divided by the change in disposable income. So the MPC is the change in consumption divided by the change in disposable income. Remember, disposable income can change if there's a change in income or a change in transfers or a change in taxes. So the MPC looks at how much consumption spending changes when there's a change in our disposable income. Now, Monday, when I asked you the question about how would you respond to an additional $200 in your paycheck, I followed that up by asking you, would you respond differently if that $200 change was a raise versus if it was a cut in your taxes, right? And there were a bunch of you who said, yeah, I would respond differently. I would increase my spending by more if it was a raise. Or some people said I would increase my spending by more if it was a change in taxes. Defining the MPC as being the change in consumption divided by the change in disposable income without making any distinction between income and taxes and transfers, that's reflecting an assumption that people don't care. So it's in contrast to what you told me, the assumption behind this definition, behind this little thing that you have to know about, behind this thing that's going to be important we're going to talk about, the assumption behind that, the fact that we're dividing just by the change in disposable income and not distinguishing between raises and tax cuts, the assumption behind that is that people respond to a change in disposable income exactly the same way, whether that change in disposable income comes from a change in income, a raise, or a change in transfers, or a change in taxes. Now you said, with your clickers, that's not a good assumption. But it's a simplifying assumption. So we stick with that simplifying assumption for now, and as we go along, we explore the implications of what would be the difference in the many stories that we'll tell if that assumption was not true, if in fact the world behaved the way that you all behaved. Okay. The MPC, change in consumption divided by the change in disposable income. For the economy as a whole, the MPC is less than 1. So empirical studies over time, we look at how people respond to a change in disposable income. The MPC is less than 1. For you guys, you had a change in consumption of about $65 for a change in disposable income of $200. 65 divided by 200 is 0.325. So for Econ 1 students, the MPC is about 0.325, again, a number less than 1. It tells us how much of each additional dollar of disposable income goes to buying final goods and services. Now, given that the MPC is the change in consumption over the change in disposable income, we can simply do a little bit of cross-multiplying here and get that the change in consumption is equal to the MPC times the change in disposable income. So I could back it out the other way. I could say, I can tell you that for Econ 1 students, that if there is a change in disposable income of $200, given that they have an MPC of 0.325, that means there's a change in consumption spending of about $65 in response to that $200 change in take-home pay. Just using the definition moving around. Question on the side. Can MPC ever be equal to 1? For individuals, yes. For the economy as a whole, empirically, it's not been shown to be equal to or greater than 1. And so remember, that's an important point, right? That what we saw on Monday with the clicker question is that for, 3 or 4% of people in the room, the MPC was exactly equal to 1. They were going to spend all $200. What matters is for the aggregate economy. For the aggregate economy, empirically what we've seen is it's less than 1. All right. So let's do a little quick clicker question. Suppose that disposable income falls by $1,000 billion per year, and the MPC is 80%. 80%, you'll need to convert that, I suppose, into decimals, which you can do. The change in consumption would be what? A, change in C equals 0.8 times 1,000. B, change in consumption equals 0.8 plus 1,000. C, change in consumption equals 0.8 times negative 1,000. D, it can't be determined with just this information. Or E, I wasn't really paying attention. I don't know what the hell you're doing. I said more politely, it's not a clue. A, B, C, D, or E. You guys are talking too much. Yeah, thank you. All right, 3 seconds. 1, 2, and 3. What do we get? We get a 72% happy face. Option C, keyword, disposable income falls. Most common wrong answer here is A, but disposable income is falling, which means the change in disposable income is negative, and therefore the change in consumption will be negative as well. Disposable income goes down, consumption spending goes down. Here's another one. Try this one. Suppose disposable